This presentation is called Designing for Diversity, Introducing Universal Design for Learning. I want to begin with a story. Imagine that there is a woman who goes into a tailor, a very famous tailor in Paris, and describes a dress that she wants to be made. And she gives a 2-week timeline. It has to be ready in 2 weeks. And she says, what I'm looking for is a dress that has, and she goes on and lists several features, a neck strap, a floor-length train, floral embellishments on the hips, some sort of a sparkly flare. And the tailor says, no problem, I will have this ready for you in 2 weeks. Go on your way. So the woman comes back 2 weeks later, and the tailor is very excited. He feels that he's done everything that this woman has asked for, and he proudly unveils the dress. And there it has the neck strap, the floor-length train, the floral embellishments, the sparkle flare. It's all there. And yet the woman is frustrated, and she says, oh, no, this is all wrong. And the tailor is absolutely astounded, and he says, well, what possibly could I have done wrong? And she says, well, I can't wear lime green to my wedding. You see, the problem here was not that the tailor was lacking in details. All of the details were correct. But where the failure broke down was because the tailor was not told what the objective was. He didn't know for what he was designing the product. I think the instruction is something that requires design as well. And well-designed instructional materials and experiences, as with all designed products, are those with a clear sense of purpose and audience. I think that good design is design that's driven by principles of design. So what principles? I want to introduce you to Universal Design for Learning as a set of principles that will help us drive how we design and deliver learning experiences that are efficient and effective. So what is UDL? UDL is a set of design principles for curriculum development that give all individuals equitable opportunities to learn and express their learning. It provides a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone, not a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customized and adjusted. In this presentation, I want to focus in introducing you to UDL on 3 framework aspects: how we clearly articulate objectives, how we identify potential barriers, and how we use the principles of learning to access learning. Let's look at each. At its heart, UDL is about design. And good design, as we've already seen, requires knowing the purpose for which you're designing. Rather than clear learning objectives, what are some of the things that instructors sometimes use to guide course or content or curriculum or assessment design? Well, 2 of the most common might be textbooks and tradition. Textbooks might mean I'm going to be teaching a course in engineering thermodynamics, and I find a textbook called Fundamentals of Engineering Thermodynamics. And I think this is an excellent textbook with good information, and the organization of the content is good, and so I'm going to use that to drive my course design. Or I might say I'm going to teach the way that I was taught. I feel like I'm very good at calculus or chemistry or whatever it is that I'm teaching, and so the way that I was taught must have been effective, and so I'm going to go ahead and continue to teach in that way. In fact, social learning theorists would suggest that this is our most natural phenomenon, that we will teach the way that we have been taught, not the way we've been taught to teach. We want to challenge that. As we've seen, even if you have good details, even if there is in fact good information in that text, even if the way that you're teaching, everything you're saying is accurate, everything that you're presenting your students is useful, it doesn't matter if the students are not achieving an objective that is worthwhile, that is clear and explicit to all parties involved. In good UDL design, the good design of instructional experiences, we have to first start by saying, Where do I want my students to end? At the end of this lesson, the end of this semester, the end of this course, the end of this course sequence, what do I want my students to know and be able to do? And we work backwards to determine then, is this textbook the best textbook in helping them achieve that? Are there other methods and materials? Are there different experiences that I can give them that will better help the variability of my students achieve the outcome that we have set? Along those lines, the second and very important aspect of UDL design is to think about the potential barriers that your students will face. To illustrate this, there's a classic image that's been floating around the internet for some time now that's demonstrating the concept of equality versus equity. This image is supposed to demonstrate equality, where we have these three people of varying heights who are trying to watch a baseball game. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that they're allowed to watch a baseball game for the outfield. The fence is just there to protect people who are out there and mark where the field ends. But as you can see, the picket fences here are creating a barrier, and so these people find some boxes to stand on. Obviously, not all of them need boxes, and even with the box, not all of them are able to gain access to the game. Well, in traditional approaches to education, we recognize that there is variability in the population. For example, one example of many, the person on the right might have some sort of disability that makes accessing the content, the learning, difficult. So in traditional special education, for example, we talk about equity, where we give to each student according to their needs. In this case, if we have 3 boxes, we give 2 boxes to the one who needs it the most, and no boxes to the one who doesn't need it at all. That's essentially what we do here with the Student Disability Services, for example, where students who have significant needs are given opportunities for supports. The problem with this sort of mindset is that it assumes that the problem exists in the individual. But this is an assumption, and one that's so ingrained, it's difficult for us to conceptualize the challenge to it. But consider this. What if it's not the problem doesn't exist solely in the individual, but in the interaction of the individual and the environment? If we change the environment to make it more flexible, more accessible, then the variation in the students no longer matters. In the classroom, this might mean recognizing, for example, that students are going to learn content in different ways. Some in some situations will prefer to read, while others will learn best if they can hear it, and others will learn best if they can have a hands-on experience. When I teach in only one way, it's like creating the picket fence there. Some people will do just fine, and some are going to need significant supports. But what if, instead of giving significant supports to individuals, I provide flexibility in how students engage with the content? For example, they can read something and or listen to it and or have an activity in which they do hands-on experience with it. And thus, with the change of the environment, no modifications, accommodations, or additional supports are needed by anybody. They are all able to learn and achieve the objective. So identifying potential barriers is typically presented this way, where we have a variability in our students, and as they're on their way to their objectives, there are barriers in the way that the environment, the learning experience has been designed. And we want to create learning experiences that help our students break through or reduce the effects of those barriers to achieve the objectives. However, we also need to look at it the other way. Once students have achieved objectives, they need to communicate back to the instructors that they have in fact learned. We oftentimes ignore the barriers that are present in assessments. And so in UDL design, we think about those as well, and provide assessments that allow students to demonstrate their learning without those kinds of barriers in place. For example, some students might find essay writing to be a skill that is significantly challenging to them, but if essay writing is completely irrelevant to the content that I'm assessing, maybe I can provide other ways that students can demonstrate mastery of their knowledge and understanding of deforestation, for example. Maybe that's doing a presentation or creating a model or some other way demonstrating their learning. So identifying potential barriers gives us the first step to addressing them. and then of course we need to address them. I've been giving some examples of that in passing here, but I want to show that Universal Design for Learning gives a concrete framework for addressing these according to principles that are based in what we have learned about how people learn in the neurosciences, the cognitive sciences, and other domains. What we found is that the most effective way to reach your diverse students is to provide multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. Doing this systematically reduces barriers and provides equitable access to all of your learners effectively and efficiently. But what does it have to do with you? I mean, this is probably a question that you don't want to ask out loud, but it's an important one to ask because faculty are busy. You have a lot on your plate above and beyond teaching. Well, I want to quote Thomas Tobin, who said in a recent workshop, I'm going to say it out loud, UDL isn't just for students, it's for faculty. So in part 2, I want to explore what the role of faculty is in UDL and how UDL can actually benefit the faculty themselves as well. So in this model that we looked at before, we see students, we see the context of learning, we see the end result of learning, but where are the faculty? They're implicit to all of this, but I haven't yet made clear what the role is. Well, on the one hand, faculty, of course, are called to create those objectives, like we talked about. They're called to develop those sort of learning experiences that the students are going to undergo. And if we make rich, profound learning experiences that are flexible and have multiple means of representation, action and expression and engagement, we're also creating work, if we're honest. UDL does require more work up front from faculty. This is high quality product design that we're undergoing. So that itself can become a barrier for faculty who are pressed for time. If UDL is going to work, if you're going to be able to practice it, we have to address that barrier as well. Well, one way that we can respond to this is to recognize that one of the things that we all want our students to learn. In an ideal, perfect situation, faculty would be able to stand in front of their students and teach them and bring them smoothly all the way to the objective, no problem. You'd be just like Dead Poet Society, the students are with you and they're getting it and they're learning. Reality, however, is not so kind. Those barriers are very real. Barriers for students might include the effects of disabilities, whether they're diagnosed or not diagnosed, reported or not reported. It could be cultural, linguistic differences. It could be variation in the knowledge and skill that they bring to the course. It could be lack of interest in the content, which has profound impact on the degree to which students are able to learn. All of these types of barriers affecting different types of students in the population means that when you go to teach them, some of them will make it and some of them won't. Now, by the time students are in higher education, they have to be fairly driven to get into the University of Tennessee, and they're paying a good amount of money. Most of these students are not going to be satisfied with simply not achieving the objective. And so, as you might have seen before, you're going to get emails from the students. You're going to get requests for office hour time. You're going to get the request to support these students and go back and catch them up and bring them in and help them with tutoring and support to help them get to the objective. Even then, not all of these students are going to make it. You're going to see dropouts. You're going to see students who are not satisfied. And this whole process creates work as well. In fact, I would argue that in many situations, this creates more work for the faculty than it would have been had they started with good design in the first place. I mean, think about the tailor. The tailor made a dress that was very high quality, but left a customer behind that was unsatisfied. And now the tailor is going to have to go back and redo the whole process. That's far more time consuming than if the tailor had begun with good design principles, known the objectives, designed according to those objectives, and met the needs of the client to begin with. It would have required more time up front, but ultimately have saved a tremendous amount of time. So, how do we go about doing this? Breaking down and reducing the barriers to help our students achieve the objective. I want to leave you today with just a few actionables. Universal Design for Learning is an iterative, complex design process and something that we continue to practice and learn and improve on as we move forward. But there are some things that you can start doing right away to improve the quality of your teaching and learning. So I'm going to give you some actionables for UDL-based learning. Remember that there are these three principles: provide multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. To get started, I encourage faculty to think in a +1 mentality. What's one more way that I can represent information, one more way that my students can express themselves, or one more way that I can engage them than I otherwise would have? Some examples of these might be creating content choice in how you're presenting information, facilitating flexibility in instruction, and how students respond to instruction and assessment, and optimizing value and authenticity. Let's look at each of those. Imagine that you're presenting your students with a YouTube video or some other media that they're going to be watching in class or out of class. A +1 mentality for this might mean making sure that that video has high-quality closed captions. That's it. There's a lot of research that demonstrates that when watching videos for academic or informational purposes, the use of closed captioning benefits everybody. We find that there's better comprehension and retention of information when I heard it and read it simultaneously. Of course, students who are English language learners, who have audio processing disorders, or who have hearing impairments are all going to require that in order to fully understand the video anyway. But you're really benefiting everybody. Likewise, if you're presenting information in text, which is of course very common in higher education, we might think about providing an MP3 file of that text. And there's actually extremely easy ways to do that using hardware and software that you already have access to. In fact, on a Mac, you could take a Word document and convert it into an MP3 file in as little as 10 seconds. You might also be thinking about how I can visually represent concepts that I'm presenting in my text documents. The point is to use images that are not simply decorative, but that add conceptual understanding or representation of what's being presented in the text. While some people will rely on these features, all of your students will benefit from having the option to access these additional means of representing the content. Another idea is to consider starting with text. For example, one instructor might want to make podcasts for her classes, and another might be preparing a lecture to introduce a new unit, while a third wants to explain how to use key classroom equipment, for example in a chemistry lab. In all of these cases, we have a tendency to orally present information, and I suggest that it's a great idea to begin with text first. When we start with a text document, this gives us an easy way to, for example, create closed captions, provide a transcript, adapt it into teacher-guided notes, or provide a reference for our students to refer to later. It also enhances the quality of the oral product that we eventually create. And so starting with a text gives us an easy way to create that +1 of another way to represent information that is normally orally in textual form. So how do we facilitate flexibility in instruction and assessment? More to the point. Well, so far what we've been talking about is strategies to support learning, to get the students from not having mastered the objective to having mastered it. What we want to do now is recognize that we also need to go the other way in developing strategies for creating assessments that enable students to break through the barriers. We already kind of touched on this, but I want to bring it a little bit further, where in a lot of classes, essay writing is the standard. In fact, a lot of instructors say that they expect that by the time you're in college, you know how to write an essay. And while there's a lot of merit to that, and I certainly understand that, having been an English teacher myself for almost a decade, it's important to recognize that for many careers, once we get out into the field, writing formal essays isn't actually something that people do outside of academe or some facets of certain careers. And so it's also important to recognize that if students are lacking essay writing skills, and essay writing skills are not taught in your class, but other content is, then some students feel disenfranchised by the fact that they're being asked to write something that assesses a skill that is irrelevant to the objectives of the course. And it's difficult to counter that argument. So, it's a great idea for instructors to think whenever they're giving a major assessment that is using a skill that's unrelated or irrelevant to the course objectives and what is taught, to consider providing flexibility in how students will respond. So, for example, instead of just being able to write an essay, maybe they can make a presentation, maybe they can do an audio podcast, maybe they can do a project. And no matter what option they choose, you are looking for the same demonstration of knowledge and skill, and however they choose to communicate it. So the same rubric could actually be used regardless of the form of communication from the students. This can be extremely powerful for improving the validity of your assessments and the satisfaction of your students who feel like finally I'm able to demonstrate what I really know and really can do. Finally, I want to look at optimizing value and authenticity. This is perhaps the most difficult for me to give you specific ideas for, because value and authenticity are so contingent on what it is that you're teaching and the type of course that you're delivering. But let me show you some examples broadly of how value and authenticity can be enhanced in the classroom. Imagine that each of these puzzle pieces represents a specific assignment that students are completing over the course of a semester. One thing that a lot of instructors have found to be very successful is to create assignments that are tasks that work towards something of great value. That over the course of the semester, the students begin to see how the things that they've been doing come together into a really meaningful product, something that they can actually use or sell or publish or demonstrate mastery of something at a higher level, put in a portfolio that they can use to get a job, a meaningful product that demonstrates mastery of a skill that was built over small assignments over the course of a semester. Another way to develop value and authenticity is to make sure that the way that you're teaching and providing experiences is truly authentic to what's happening in the field. This could be using job site experiences or tapping into the experiential learning program here at UT, which has been so successful. Or use examples and problems from real-world settings. This might be, for example, if you're teaching in the education department, using video clips of what's happening in classrooms right now and having discussions about how we can use the principles we've been talking about to address situations like this. In a economics class, it might be looking at current issues in economics and talking about how the principles that we've been reading about and talking about might inform decisions that we would make if we were working for a corporate entity or a government entity, given the data that we're getting from current markets. It could also be facilitating discussions regarding current events that don't have an answer. This can be very motivating when, maybe in a science class where we're coming up against a phenomena where our current paradigm of cellular biology doesn't give us an answer to deal with what's happening in this phenomena, and allowing students to discuss something that not even experts in the field have an answer to can be a great way to stretch their thinking and increase the value, because their ideas may well spark something that drives the field forward, and that's engaging for a lot of people. Another idea is that if you're teaching a 100 level course that focuses on skills, for example, if you were teaching English 101 or 102 and you focus on writing skills, why not provide options in terms of the content? allowing students to find something that's relevant and meaningful to them as a content to write about, then makes the process of learning to write about it well a lot easier than if I have to learn content that I'm not interested in and write about it. That splits my attention across too many things. Having high interest in what I'm dealing with gives me the ability to focus better on the skill that I'm trying to learn. Of course, then we have the traditional engagements. This could be for most of our students, many of our students, getting a good grade matters to them. And so having clarity in how they can do that and how this assignment relates to their grade. Maybe they're just interested in the content of the class and they find the material is engaging. We should certainly hope for that with a lot of our students. Or maybe the social dynamics of the class. Those are more traditional things. But the point is that no one of these is going to be effective for engaging all of our students. In order to improve value and authenticity, we want a +1. Just begin thinking. Is there, in addition to grades, for example, another way that I can make this content valuable and authentic for my students? In so doing, we're already taking steps to make your classes more accessible and more enhanced for the kind of variability in students that you can fully expect. I want to end by providing you with a couple of resources that will help you begin your journey as UDL practitioners. One is Implementing UDL on Canvas. We designed this over the course of the last year as a way to address specific barriers with specific actionable approaches on Canvas specifically. So this is a great resource to help you as you're building your Canvas course. How do I build materials that are going to meet the needs of students, for example, who are variable in the knowledge and skill that they bring into the course? How am I going to help students who are not engaged in the content of the course and need additional supports to motivate and sustain them when things get difficult? Those kinds of specific barriers, and it looks at how Canvas features can be used to address that. To access that, go to tiny.utk.edu/UDL on Canvas. The UDL and the C on Canvas have to be capitalized. Then there's also, from the creators, original developers of UDL, the Center for Applied Special Technology at Harvard, is a new website called UDL on Campus. This provides resources, ideas, examples, and networking opportunities related to UDL in higher education. To access that, go to udloncampus.cast.org. And of course, if you have any other questions, want support, or need a consultation, you can contact the Office of Information Technology. I'm here as a UDL specialist on campus, and our instructional designers have also been trained in implementing UDL. We're here to support you, and ultimately we hope that the practice of UDL makes our courses and our campus a more inviting and effective learning experience for our students and for our faculty. Thank you.